Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Why attack Nikki? The question echoes like a gunshot through the Newman dynasty as Nick and Victoria Newman finally uncover the dark, unforgivable secret Victor Newman buried deep, one so calculated, so cruel, that it reframes everything Nikki has endured and ignites a full-blown family war that can never be undone. It begins with fragments, half-truths whispered by terrified insiders, a paper trail Victor assumed was erased, and one devastating recording that lands in Nick's hands late at night, forcing him to listen as his father coldly authorizes a covert operation designed to break Nikki, financially, emotionally, publicly, so she would be too weakened to challenge him or protect the Abbott alliance he despises. As the truth unravels, Nick's disbelief turns to fury when he realizes Victor didn't just manipulate Nikki. He orchestrated her humiliation, weaponized her vulnerabilities, and greenlit a campaign that pushed her to the brink, all while pretending to be the wounded husband fighting for his marriage. The betrayal detonates inside Nick's chest as memories resurface, Nikki's shaking hands, her sleepless nights, her confusion over sudden reversals that made her doubt her own instincts, and he understands now that none of it was accidental. Victor engineered it. Victoria's reckoning is even colder, sharper, more surgical. She pores over documents and timelines, connects the dots between shell companies, planted leaks, and a shadow consultant whose sole purpose was to trigger Nikki's past struggles while framing the chaos as collateral damage in Victor's war against Jack. The realization hits her like ice water. Victor used Nikki as leverage, as bait, as a shield, and when Nikki pushed back, Victor escalated, authorizing a personal attack meant to destroy her credibility forever. The siblings confront each other first, the room thick with shock and rage, Nick pacing like a caged animal while Victoria's voice remains terrifyingly steady as she lays out the facts piece by piece, concluding with the truth neither of them wants to say out loud, that their father crossed a line so final, so vile, that defending him would make them complicit. When they storm into the Newman mansion together, it's not as children seeking answers but as adults delivering judgment. Victor senses the shift immediately, the air changes, power recoils, and for the first time in years, he is not the one in control. Nick explodes, demanding to know why attack Nikki, why humiliate the woman who stood by him through prison, illness, and endless wars, why choose cruelty when reconciliation was still possible. Victor's response is chillingly unapologetic. He claims necessity, strategy, the cost of survival in a world where weakness invites annihilation. He insists Nikki forced his hand by aligning with the Abbotts, by threatening his empire, by daring to believe she could leave without consequences. That's when Victoria strikes, her words precise and lethal, exposing the lie beneath his bravado, that this wasn't about business at all, it was about control, about punishing Nikki for choosing herself. She reveals the final proof, the signature authorization Victor thought would never surface, and the room falls silent as even Victor cannot deny what's been exposed. Nikki, standing in the doorway, hears enough. Her heartbreak is quiet, devastating, the kind that changes a person forever. Nick moves to her side instantly, shielding her from Victor's gaze, his voice breaking as he vows this ends now, that no one, not even Victor Newman, gets to destroy Nikki and walk away unscathed. Victoria makes it official, she's done covering, done spinning, done sacrificing her soul to protect a man who sees family as expendable assets. The revolt is immediate and brutal. Nick cuts Victor off from information pipelines he once controlled with ease, leveraging allies who have waited years for this moment. Victoria freezes strategic accounts and initiates internal reviews that strip Victor of his silent advantages. Not to seize power for herself but to ensure he can never weaponize the company against Nikki again. Victor rages, accusing them of betrayal, of weakness, of choosing sentiment over legacy, but the words land hollow, because for the first time, his children are united against him. The family fractures in real time as loyalties shatter and old wounds bleed open, with Nikki refusing Victor's apologies, if he even attempts them, and making it clear that love does not survive manipulation. The fallout spreads like wildfire, allies choose sides, enemies circle, and the legend of Victor Newman begins to crack as whispers of his cruelty become impossible to silence. Nick confronts the ghosts of his past, realizing how often he excused the inexcusable, and swears this ends with accountability, not another cover-up. Victoria faces her own reckoning, accepting that strength without conscience becomes tyranny, and that her father crossed into a darkness she will not follow. And Victor, cornered, exposed, furious, discovers the one outcome he never planned for, a united front of children willing to burn down his kingdom to protect the woman he tried to break. Why attack Nikki? The answer is finally clear, and it damns Victor more than any enemy ever could, because this time, the war isn't Newman versus the world. It's Newman versus Newman, and there may be no way back. The war doesn't end with confrontation, it only mutates, growing more vicious and personal as the Newman family absorbs the shockwaves of Victor's exposed secret, and the mansion that once symbolized unity becomes a battlefield lined with silence, slammed doors, and whispered strategy. In the hours after Nick and Victoria turn on their father, Nikki retreats into herself, not out of weakness but exhaustion, the kind that settles into bones after years of fighting a battle she never knew was rigged against her. Nick stays close, refusing to leave her side, replaying every moment he once dismissed as Victor being Victor, and each memory now lands like a punch to the gut. He remembers Nikki questioning her own sanity, wondering aloud how things kept unraveling around her, and he feels sick knowing the truth, that his father engineered the chaos, then stood by pretending to be her savior. Victoria, meanwhile, becomes ice-cold resolve incarnate, mobilizing systems Victor once controlled, not to crown herself queen but to cage a tyrant who finally revealed his hand. She convenes emergency meetings, not as Victor's heir but as a firewall, issuing directives that isolate him from sensitive intelligence, rerouting authority with surgical precision while making it clear to the board that this is about ethics, not ambition. Victor pushes back with every weapon he has, threats, guilt, history, but the usual levers fail. His children aren't wavering, they're escalating. When Victor attempts to corner Nikki alone, framing his actions as protection gone too far, she shuts him down with devastating calm, telling him the marriage ended the moment he decided her pain was an acceptable casualty. That rejection cuts deeper than any corporate loss, and Victor lashes out, accusing Nick and Victoria of being manipulated, of letting emotion blind them, of forgetting who built the empire they're standing in. Nick fires back with a truth Victor can't deflect, that empires built on cruelty eventually rot from the inside, and that Victor crossed from ruthless to unforgivable when he targeted Nikki's vulnerabilities instead of facing her strength. The siblings take the fight beyond the mansion, alerting allies who once assumed Victor's actions were merely aggressive strategy, not personal vendetta. As details leak, strategic leaks Victor authorized, psychological pressure applied at precise moments, deliberate attempts to destabilize Nikki's public standing, the narrative shifts. This isn't business warfare anymore, it's abuse of power. Longtime supporters begin to distance themselves, and rivals smell blood in the water. Victor realizes too late that the secret wasn't just dark, it was radioactive. Nikki, refusing to be framed as a victim, steps into the light on her own terms, confronting those who doubted her and reclaiming her narrative with a quiet dignity that contrasts sharply with Victor's fury. Nick publicly aligns himself with her, drawing a line that cannot be blurred, while Victoria makes it clear that loyalty to family does not mean obedience to wrongdoing. The family war reaches a boiling point when Victor attempts one final power play, threatening to expose secrets of his own unless his children stand down. Instead of retreating, Nick and Victoria call his bluff, daring him to scorch the earth and prove everything they've accused him of. The standoff is brutal, emotional, and final, leaving Victor isolated in the very house he once ruled unquestioned. As dawn breaks, the Newmans are irrevocably changed, Nikki resolute in her independence, Nick hardened but clear-eyed, Victoria steady and unflinching, and Victor forced to confront the unthinkable reality that his greatest loss isn't power or reputation, but the unwavering allegiance of the family he believed he owned. The aftermath doesn't settle, it sharpens. What follows Victor's isolation is not silence but strategy, a cold recalibration from every corner of the Newman universe as power, loyalty, and legacy are redefined in real time. Nikki wakes the next morning with a clarity that surprises even her. The grief is still there, heavy and bruising, but beneath it lies resolve. For the first time in decades, she is no longer reacting to Victor's moves, she is choosing her own. She gathers Nick and Victoria in the living room, the same space where countless battles were once staged under Victor's command, and tells them she refuses to be the reason their relationship with their father is permanently destroyed. But she also makes one thing painfully clear: forgiveness is not on the table, not now, not soon, and perhaps not ever. What Victor did wasn't a mistake born of fear, it was a deliberate campaign of control. Nick promises her that this isn't about choosing sides anymore, it's about ending a cycle that poisoned every Newman relationship it touched. Victoria echoes him, admitting something she's never said aloud, that she spent her life learning how to survive Victor, not how to be better than him, and that ends now. Victor, watching this unity from the shadows of his own home, realizes his worst fear has come true, not that his children turned against him, but that they no longer need him. He attempts damage control through intermediaries, sending envoys to test loyalty, to whisper doubt, to remind people of favors owed. But the responses are cautious, measured, distant. The myth of Victor Newman's invincibility has cracked, and no amount of intimidation can glue it back together. As investigations quietly begin, internal audits, ethics reviews, legal consultations, Victor's name appears where it never should have, tying corporate maneuvering to deeply personal sabotage. Nikki's allies rally around her, not out of pity but respect, and when she finally speaks privately to those closest to her, her words carry weight. She will not allow Victor to rewrite history or minimize her pain. Nick channels his rage into action, cutting off old pipelines Victor once used to gather intelligence, and when Victor confronts him, demanding to know when his son became his enemy, Nick responds with devastating honesty, that Victor made himself the enemy the moment he chose power over love. Victoria faces her own crucible as whispers circulate that she's staging a coup. She shuts that narrative down publicly, declaring that leadership without accountability is tyranny, and that her goal is not to replace Victor but to dismantle the mechanisms that allowed him to operate unchecked. The family war intensifies when Victor attempts to regain leverage through an unexpected move, reaching out to an old adversary, hoping to destabilize Nick and Victoria's alliance. Instead, the move backfires spectacularly, exposing just how desperate he's become. Nikki learns of it last, and when she does, something inside her finally breaks, not into despair, but freedom. She confronts Victor one final time, not with anger, but with truth, telling him she no longer recognizes the man she once loved and refuses to be collateral in his endless battles. Victor's silence in that moment is louder than any threat he's ever made. As days turn into weeks, the Newman family reshapes itself around new boundaries. Nick and Victoria don't celebrate, they mourn what could have been while accepting what is. Victor remains defiant, but the walls are closing in, not through vengeance, but consequence. And Nikki, standing at the center of the storm she never asked for, emerges not broken but unbound, the catalyst for a reckoning that will echo through the Newman legacy for generations. The reckoning stretches on, relentless and inescapable, as the Newman family learns that exposure is only the beginning of consequence. With Victor sidelined and his reach blunted, the vacuum he leaves behind doesn't fill with triumph, it fills with truth, and truth has a way of cutting deeper than any corporate blade. Nikki begins to reclaim spaces she once avoided, stepping into rooms where her voice was overshadowed, her instincts dismissed, and her pain weaponized. Each step forward feels like defiance, not against Victor alone, but against the version of herself that was conditioned to endure rather than demand better. Nick watches this transformation with a mix of pride and guilt, realizing how often he stood between Nikki and Victor's wrath without truly stopping the storm. He resolves to make amends not with apologies, but with action, backing Nikki publicly and privately, dismantling the subtle systems Victor used to isolate her. Victoria, meanwhile, confronts a quieter terror, the fear that Victor's darkness lives inside her too. She interrogates every instinct, every decision, asking herself whether strength can exist without domination. In boardrooms and back corridors, she pushes for transparency, instituting reforms that limit unilateral power, knowing full well that Victor will see them as a personal attack. And maybe they are. Victor's response is predictable yet dangerous. He grows colder, more calculating, retreating into the shadows where he believes he's most lethal. He begins collecting leverage again, testing alliances, probing for fractures between Nick and Victoria, convinced their unity is temporary. But the siblings anticipate him this time, communicating openly, refusing to let old rivalries be resurrected. When Victor attempts to bait Nick with half-truths about Victoria's ambitions, Nick shuts it down immediately, telling his father that manipulation no longer works when secrets are dragged into the light. The blow lands hard. For the first time, Victor realizes his usual divide-and-conquer strategy is useless. Nikki becomes the axis around which everything turns, not as a pawn but as a compass. Her calm presence steadies Nick's volatility and sharpens Victoria's focus, reminding them both that this war began with cruelty and must end with accountability. The outside world catches up quickly. Rumors solidify into narratives, and narratives into scrutiny. Journalists circle, analysts dissect, and rivals exploit the instability Victor once thrived on. Nikki refuses to hide, attending events with her head high, refusing to be framed as a casualty. When asked about Victor, she doesn't lash out, she tells the truth, simply and clearly, and the restraint is devastating. Victor, watching from afar, feels something unfamiliar gnaw at him, irrelevance. His name no longer commands immediate obedience, his threats no longer freeze rooms. He lashes out legally, filing motions and countersuits designed to intimidate, but each move only underscores how far he's fallen from omnipotence to desperation. Nick takes a personal risk, aligning publicly with reforms that weaken Victor's grip permanently, knowing it could cost him relationships and opportunities, but he accepts the price. Victoria faces her own trial when an ally questions whether she's using morality as a smokescreen for control. She answers without hesitation, if power can't survive scrutiny, it doesn't deserve to exist. The family war reaches another crescendo when Victor attempts reconciliation, not with Nikki, but with the image of her he prefers, offering apologies that stop short of responsibility. Nikki refuses the gesture, telling him that remorse without change is manipulation dressed as regret. That rejection seals something inside Victor. He doubles down, determined to prove he's still the architect of everyone's fate. But the ground has shifted too much. Allies defect, deals unravel, and the empire he built begins to resemble a monument to hubris rather than invincibility. Nick and Victoria don't celebrate the collapse, they brace for impact, knowing Victor is most dangerous when cornered. The final blow doesn't come from a boardroom or courtroom, it comes from Nikki herself, who announces a decisive break that is not theatrical but final, severing the last emotional tether Victor exploited. Her declaration reframes the entire saga, transforming it from a power struggle into a moral reckoning. Victor stands alone, surrounded by the echoes of choices he can no longer undo. And as the Newmans move forward, scarred, wiser, and irrevocably changed, they understand that legacy isn't measured by dominance, but by what survives when fear no longer rules. The family war leaves no clear victors, only truths laid bare, and in that brutal honesty, a future finally begins. The future doesn't arrive gently, it crashes in waves, each one exposing another fracture in the Newman legacy as the consequences of Victor's choices keep unfolding long after the shouting stops. In the days following Nikki's decisive break, the mansion feels haunted, its grand halls echoing with memories Victor can no longer control. He paces like a caged lion, replaying conversations, searching for the moment everything slipped beyond his grasp, but the truth is unavoidable. This wasn't one mistake, or one secret, it was a lifetime of domination finally answered with defiance. Nikki moves forward without theatrics, but her absence from Victor's orbit is deafening. She rebuilds her life deliberately, reconnecting with friends Victor once subtly pushed away, reclaiming passions she abandoned to survive his wars, and every step she takes without him weakens his shadow. Nick becomes her fiercest protector, not out of obligation, but conviction, openly challenging anyone who dares suggest Nikki provoked what happened. He speaks with a raw honesty that shocks even longtime allies, admitting how deeply the family normalized Victor's cruelty, how often they mistook fear for loyalty. Victoria, walking a razor's edge between reform and rebellion, finds herself tested at every turn as Victor's loyalists quietly undermine her efforts, hoping she'll crack under pressure and restore the old order. Instead, she tightens governance, exposes hidden clauses, and dismantles the unchecked authority Victor once wielded, each move provoking his rage but also his growing helplessness. Victor strikes back where he still can, through psychological warfare, planting doubts, reviving old grievances, whispering to anyone who will listen that Nick is unstable and Victoria is power-hungry. But the smear campaign falters, because the truth has already changed the narrative. Nikki's dignity disarms suspicion, Nick's transparency earns trust, and Victoria's restraint under fire proves her motives are not selfish. The family war escalates again when a long-buried incident resurfaces, another secret Victor buried years ago, now unearthed by scrutiny he can no longer stop. The revelation reopens wounds Nikki didn't even know existed, forcing her to confront how deeply Victor's manipulation shaped her life. This time, she doesn't spiral, she stands firm, supported by her children, and refuses to